Hey, it's State of State. We got your Nittany Line update. It's a football discussion with Tom and Justin, so kick back and press play.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to State of State, a Penn State football show presented by FanDuel. Make every moment more. I'm Tom Hannafin. He's Justin King. Today, we're getting into as many roster updates as we can possibly provide with Penn State training camp. Still very much in its infancy. Started last Wednesday, July 30th. We learned a lot from all the coaches and players this past weekend, going through the proverbial car wash, getting to talk with members of the media, both local and national at times, depending on which outlets you got to see. A lot of little things we can take away from this past weekend and what we understand about the team as it's formulating at this point in time. Tomorrow, we're going to get into the comments from a variety of coaches, James Franklin, Eddie Kotelnicki, Jim Knowles, all that sort of stuff. But today, talking about roster updates. Please like, comment, subscribe, rate us, turn on notifications. And if you haven't done so already, you can become a member of our YouTube channel. And for just 99 cents a month, you can get all upcoming episodes of State of State commercial free, no interruptions. You can just watch it straight through. Again, the link to that is in the description of this podcast. I want to start off with some unfortunate injury news that popped up over the weekend. Wide receiver Caden Saunders is out for an extended period of time with what the team is describing as a long-term injury. Justin, you know the program very well, and unfortunately, LIG Sports Group client Peter Gonzalez has had that label in the past. So typically that means lost for a season, multiple months at the very least. It's a heartbreaker for Caden Saunders, obviously, and a dude who so many people for a long time have been like, there's potential. When's he going to pop? He's done some stuff in special teams, kick return, punt return, all that sort of stuff. And it just hasn't come together for him. What did you feel when you heard the news about Caden Saunders?
I mean, it's incredibly disappointing, right? You know, these guys, they train, they work, they go through the whole off season, whether it's recovering from former injuries and getting ready and getting their body equipped for, you know, a championship run. And to have a serious injury, not only does it, you know, dampen your outlook on the season and how, like, the mental, but then it's like the thing that athletes deal with is that your confidence in a lot of things come from your body, right? Like, comes from like how you treat your body and how your body responds. And it's something that's not talked about enough, is that when your body doesn't respond that way anymore, right? And it's almost like your body letting you down. And that does something to a lot of athletes. I mean, it just sucks that it's happening in his last year, and hopefully he's has an opportunity to kind of match that up.
Yeah, I'd love to see if he's able to get another year potentially due to the medical issue, and you never know with how the NCAA is going to rule on this stuff. So it's certainly disappointing for Caden Saunders. Again, this is a guy who was heavily recruited by Penn State. There was a lot of buzz, a lot of excitement, what he could be within this wide receiver room that has been wide open for the taking for many years. And obviously that was addressed pretty heavily with the transfer portal this past offseason, but still our best goes out to Caden Saunders, and we'll keep an eye on that situation. One thing I wanted to bring up was the annual Bruce Feldman Freaks List, which puts out for many, many years now and address the biggest athletic freaks in college football for the upcoming season. The most of any team represented on this list this year was Penn State. 5 players put on his Freaks List: Zane Durant, Nick Singleton, Tony Rojas, Elliott Washington, and Khalil Dinkins. And I want to get to Khalil Dinkins because he got a lot of praise this past weekend. But this Freaks List is pretty fascinating, that I wasn't aware of some of these numbers. But Justin, I don't know how you feel about some of these. Zane Durant clocked in a 4.66 40. He weighs roughly 300 pounds. Nick Singleton got a 4.33 40. And a 665-pound squat, which is a school record for running backs. So just think about some of the greats that have gone through there. Saquad.
What was that number again?
665 in the squat.
Jesus.
Tony Rojas. The number for Tony Rojas, the linebacker, had popped up 4.375 in the 40. That had kind of leaked a few months ago when they were doing internal testing, if you remember.
Yeah.
Elliott Washington, who was the king of winter workouts, 4.32 40 and 37-inch vertical. And then Khalil Dinkins, 4.5 40, school record for tight ends. Freaks indeed. Thank you to Bruce Feldman for putting out that list. I always get a kick out of that stuff.
450 was, you said that was that's the record?
4.540 for Khalil Dinkins. This is described as the school record for tight ends.
Huh. Yeah, I thought Gesicki ran faster, but nope. If that's the record, that's the record. Like, that's what's up. I mean, and shout out to Khalil Dinkins. I mean, his dad played in NFL for eight or 9 years, won a Super Bowl with the Saints. So I mean, it comes from good genes from that standpoint in terms of like a football family. And I'm not surprised that he's on that list, and that Penn State has a lot of people on that freaks list, because I think every year we do, and that's shout out to former Deej and now Chuck Losey and how they've been getting guys and getting ready to perform. And shout out to the recruiting staff, because I mean, they bring in the right raw materials to be developed into these super freak numbers. I mean, over the years, that's the one thing that staff has done a great job with.
We are big fans of the kennel here on State of State. Zane Durant just blows my mind as a dude. He's listed at like 290 depending on the week, and he's hovered around 300 pounds, which is not a bad thing. Like, he had to bulk up to get to that point. Shorter in stature. I think he's maybe generously listed at 6'1" or 6 foot. He might be just a hair underneath that, but like, he is a true physical freak for how compact he is. I don't think there's a lot of body fat on the man, and I will say man at this point in time, because that's not a kid. Zane Durant, I think, is on the precipice of a huge season. I think is going to be relied upon heavily there at defensive tackle. Nick Singleton, it doesn't shock me that he's running a 4.340. I think we've known that since he was a freshman. 665 in the squat is just stupid. What was your squat?
I don't even think I had a number of squat, because we didn't really lift the same way that they do, right? We had more high intensity lifts, and when we did our maxes, it was more like a rep count, and it was the leg press. It just
okay.
You know what I mean? So it was a little different.
But so like 670 for Justin King, Nick Singleton 665. You know,
I would say just say 430, 431. That's what we care about. Just get them down.
That's where he comes from. Tony Rojas, as I mentioned, a 4.3740 for a linebacker is crazy. And considering he played so much of last year, as James Franklin detailed this past weekend, injured, you can see that shoulder sling that he was wearing most of the year, and that it's like he just didn't play at 100% this past year. So it's like, all right, you know, if he's able to pick up the system quickly under Jim Knowles this summer, which it sounds like per Jim Knowles he is, and then play healthy, play fast, react, and not be thinking, this could be a huge 2025 for number 13.
No, it's big. And you talk about those numbers, again, just kudos to the standard of linebacker is there, because you say 4.37. I mean, Mike ran 4.35. You know, as a linebacker going into the NFL at 235, and you got Jason Owe that came through at one point, was running 4.3 at 6'7", whatever, as a defensive end. So again, like, those freaky numbers at Penn State are somewhat the standard. It probably skews me a little bit when I'm dealing with players, because I kind of, if you're not hitting certain numbers, I'm not even giving you the time of the day to evaluate, just based on what I've seen and what you have to go against. Like, okay, I know what type of monsters they have up here. So if you can't really compete with them from a physical standpoint, I don't care how many drills you do. I don't care how good your technique is. The physics just do not line up. And there are good football players that can overcome some physical disadvantages, but when you see these type of freaky numbers at nauseum or at a volume, it really starts to show like, hey, this is a physics and trait-based game when you're talking about elite football.
To that point, Elliot Washington was the weight room king during the winter. So now it's a matter of, is it going to translate to the field? So just perfect thing for you to detail there is like, hey, you're looking for those numbers, but it's got to translate. And Elliot Washington certainly played well last year, but it's like, hey, taking on a larger role, you flashed as an understatement. He dominated during winter workouts and was a big part of spring ball in that discussion. So it's like, hey, what's this going to look like under Jim Knowles' defense in 2025? And then I mentioned Khalil Dinkins. It was as if there was a press release sent out internally amongst the staff and the players before the media availability this weekend. And the language said, put over Khalil Dinkins, and mention Khalil Dinkins. Just about anybody that was asked about Khalil Dinkins said he's not being talked about enough. And I've been the first person to speculate since last season that I think, hey, Luke Reynolds will probably be the number one pass catching tight end going into 2025. Some people have speculated that Khalil Dinkins would not be the starting tight end in 2025. It doesn't even sound like that's a question. It sounds like the way that James Franklin has described it, and it's kind of what I've been alluding to for a while, is that we remember the tight end room at one point where it was Strange, Johnson, and Warren. It feels eerily similar, different skill sets all around. So I don't want to label one to be equal to the other, but Dinkins, Reynolds, and Rappleyea as your three primary tight ends. James Franklin said this weekend, he's like, we feel like we can win with all three. It sounds like Rappleyea probably would have been that number 3 tight end, I guess, behind Warren and Dinkins last year had he not gotten hurt so early in the year. But Reynolds came in and played very well the Minnesota game. Thank you, Luke Reynolds, for that respect. But it sounds like the description of Khalil Dinkins from anybody that speaks about him, whether it's Nick Dawkins, James Franklin, whomever, that it's like, yeah, he did the dirty work last year. He was maybe the best blocking tight end in America. People believe that he can do that again this year. And James Franklin was quick to point out, just about every time he caught a pass, it was 4 touchdowns. So that
I was about to say he was
pretty damn good. Yeah,
I was about to say he was one of the guys at the beginning of the season when we were like, "Hey, who's getting the ball outside of
Warren.
Big 44
Yeah.
before Tyler?" And it was like, oh, it was always Dinkins. I mean, I think we brought it up early in the season last year because he kept having those drag routes in the red zone. Mr. Reliable, and then now his time is here to shine. And I remember thinking that they took care of him in terms of how they valued him internally from a price standpoint. I was like, oh, you think highly of this guy.
Good.
Before. Yeah, I mean, so I'm expecting big things from that guy.
Franklin said as much, said they expect him to have a huge year and that he believes he'll play for a very long time in the National Football League. I love Nick Dawkins in general. I think the world of the way that he handled media day this past weekend, because you couldn't say something to get him to say something. He's a very, very smart, shrewd person and a big personality. I think he's going to have a career with a microphone in his hand after his days with the Pads are done. Nick Dawkins was like, which Dinkins are we talking about? Because there's Khalil Dinkins at tight end and there's Colin Dinkins in the defensive back room. And they're like, yeah, Colin's done very well. There's a lot of excitement about both Dinkinses.
There's again, when you have a parent that's played in the NFL, sometimes we like to not discredit that, but we don't give enough credence to the fact of you having the roadmap already in front of you and just what to expect. And that's where about 50% of players fall off. It's just that transition period versus being ready, how to be a pro, how to make sure you're trustworthy to a coach, and then make the plays that you're supposed to make. And throughout this team game of football, you have that type of guidance from a parent that's been there. It really goes a long way. And sometimes, I mean, we can't always be born to a parent that played in the NFL, but I think those two guys are a great representative. And there's a lot of stories across the league now where former NFL players, kids are making nice strides in their careers.
I mentioned Colin Dinkins. I want to branch off a little bit more into the secondary lockdown. You hear Jim Knowles spoke about the usual suspects and AJ Harris, Zion Tracy, potentially at that nickel spot. That's something we talked about a lot. Zachy Wheatley, people know what we're getting there at safety, the competition beyond Zachy Wheatley at safety. The interesting thing that you heard from Jim Knowles was talking about other defensive backs, Elliot Washington, we were just discussing a while ago, and he was saying, hey, don't forget about AC, Audavion Collins, and he continues to shower praise on Darius Dixon. He continues to phrase it as, this guy should be a senior in high school right now, and he should, because Darius Dixon reclassified to the class of 2025. So it is really impressive to hear Jim Knowles continue to have positive things to say about Darius Dixon. Your Justin Lustig, special teams coordinator, say, hey, we're going to have to get him on the field in some capacity. And I think you can speak to this probably better than most in the history of Penn State football, Justin, is being that undeniable freshman talent to the point that they're like, we have to get you on the field, whether it's chasing down kickoffs or something, or returning kicks, or playing a little bit in select packages in the defensive back field, that sort of thing. But like, when you force the coaching staff's hand what goes into that? And also, what's that mentality as a player to be like, I'm going to go out and do my job, but I can't have these enormous expectations of what it's going to turn into?
Well, one, I think him coming in mid-year is a big advantage, right? And coming from a school like Modern Day, they do a great job prepping athletes on, again, how to prepare and what to prepare for. So there's a lot of learning curves for the typical high school player when you're going into college, whether it's learning coverages, learning uh, different techniques to play with coverages, or vice versa, your receiver reading coverages versus man zone and how to adjust, sight adjust, read blitzes. And there's a mental curve. So if you have that mental curve and the athletic tools to slide in there, you have a little bit of leverage to make that jump and be ready to jump on the field or produce early in the process. And this is a critical piece for a lot of athletes coming out of high school, whether you go to a school where they just kind of not exploit your talents, but not really giving you the techniques to go along with it or the mental makeup to understand the game of football. But that's how a lot of these schools are handling negotiations moving forward. It's like, how fast can this player get on the field and actually help us, right? Or what's the developmental cost? And so even from that standpoint, making sure that you have great coaching that can can help an athlete seamlessly transition into a program like Penn State is enormously beneficial. And we're seeing it with Darius Dixon. And that's what you have to have unless you're just a super freak athlete to be able to jump on the field early.
State of State is a proud supporter of Blue White Outfitters. Blue White Outfitters was created as a retail shop meant to highlight the confidence, competitiveness, and fearlessness of the elite athletes found throughout the history of Penn State University. Check out their Lockdown U and Lawn Boys merchandise today. All sales from Blue White Outfitters directly benefit Penn State student athletes. Also, official State of State merchandise is available now. Support the show and grab State of State t-shirts, hoodies, hats, and more. Visit www.bluewhiteoutfitters.com today. We're going to get into more of Jim Knowles and the defense, the progression, the evaluation of a lot of different players tomorrow here on State of State, because there are a lot of things that James Franklin and Jim Knowles said that were illuminating in regards to what the defense is going to look like in this upcoming season. One piece I do want to touch on here is Amari Campbell, the transfer linebacker from UNC. A lot of positive things that Jim Knowles had to say about Amari Campbell and Tony Rojas, both at linebacker, not to exclude Dom DeLuca, who's a veteran and performed very well during the college football playoff for Penn State. But the discussion that was out there by James Franklin was talking about what the linebacker position is going to look like more within this Jim Knowles defense, this 4-2-5. And he kind of described it as like linebackers are going to look more like true linebackers. And in the past, under Manny Diaz, for instance, that the defensive line had more of an attack front and they were gapped out. And he's like, that's going to be a little bit different. The linebackers this year are going to be asked more to read things. So from your experience, how do you interpret that?
I mean, it sounds like just a little less pass responsibility and playing downhill to stop the run and more man situations on the back end. That's what that limited information, that's what I would take from it. I mean, just when he says like playing like a true linebacker, I think he means downhill, read and run first and making sure that the run is appreciated before, worrying about where guys are dropping or even an exotic blitz package, right? Just more so reading and reacting up front. That's what I would take that quote to mean, but time will tell.
Franklin went on to say in that same breath, quote, the secondary will have more coverage diversity. He went on to say there's going to be 2 to 3 games a year where you can't just line up and play man. We in the past have had the great Johnny Dixon, former Penn State Nittany Lion defensive back on here. He's like, when you're better than people, you just play or something. It's like, I just want to play man. And that's been a sticking point, I think, for fans for a little while. And that, yes, the Penn State defense has been very, very much committed to playing man defense. But I think James Franklin points out something here that it's like, well, yeah, of course, like you're going to have those games against Jeremiah Smith and Ohio State. You're going to play against a very diverse offense in the Oregon Ducks this upcoming year. You're going to play against a good quarterback and a smart offensive schemer in Kurt Signetti against Indiana later on in the season. So it's like, yeah, you're going to have a couple of times a year where you can't just line up and play man against these guys because you're going to get burned. How do you feel about that? And is that a big change from what you understand, or is that just kind of like just articulating it a little bit more than the team has in the past?
I think he's just articulating it a little bit more than he did in the past with a new defensive coordinator, give us some context of what people can expect, maybe just a little bit of wrinkles, but no, just based on the personnel that they've brought in, they've been built to have a multi-look type of defense where guys can play in all different type of positions and be able to rock and roll. I mean, that was something major with Manny Diaz and how he was able to have the exotic blitz packages. And now that you have Coach Knowles coming in, I think the talent we spoke of earlier from just a raw ability, and then we understand the coaches there that refine the technicals and making sure everybody's in the right positions. They can cook with gas out there. And so that, I mean, I don't think it's anything different based on what they're able to do.
I do want to wind down here on quarterback Drew Aller and the wide receivers, because that's what everybody is concerned about going into this upcoming season, right? Drew Aller, according to FanDuel, is tied for the 7th best odds to win the Heisman this upcoming season. He is plus 1,800, tied with Carson Beck from Miami. He's behind Lenoris Sellers from South Carolina, Ty Simpson from Alabama, the aforementioned Jeremiah Smith from Ohio State, Garrett Nussmeier of LSU, Cade Klubnik from Clemson, and Arch Manning of Texas is the leader in the clubhouse, plus 700, but Drew Aller currently at plus 1,800 to win the Heisman. His wide receiver room, everybody is asking about how are the 3 transfers doing. Kyron Hudson from USC, Devontae Ross from Troy, and of course, Trebor Pena from Syracuse. Trebor Pena made it clear that he is actually Drew Aller's locker mate. His locker neighbor sits right next to him. So I love to hear those little things of guys like, hey, I'm just trying to learn something. I might as well sit next to the guy who has most of the answers. Drew Aller just said most of these wide receivers, these transfer guys, he's like, it's just a team first room, very unselfish group. Pointed out the likes of Kobe Howard, Lyric Samuel, Tysier Denmark, Josiah Brown as young wide receivers who've stood out. And I think an interesting thing that James Franklin talked about is that these 3 transfer wide receivers, I believe Ross has a few years of eligibility. I can never recall on that front, but Pena and Hudson, I believe these are their final years. He kind of described it as a stopgap, in that it's like, we've described it as like, oh, the team going all in for 2025, trying to make sure there's as much wide receiver talent there as possible. But it is a stopgap in a lot of ways. And then it's like those young guys who you and I have been talking about for freaking years now. It's like, okay, we'll get through 25, but you got to show up in 26. And this is the time, and these are the reps to get to lay that groundwork. So overall, Drew Aller just expressed that it's a team first group, and every wide receiver that was able to speak to the media was like, yep, I'll do whatever they ask me to do. That sort of thing. Like, it was very much that bought in mentality and not a me thing, more a we sort of thing. So I'd love to hear that. What are your general feelings, and what have you heard at this point about the wide receiver core?
I mean, kind of what you're saying in the sense of like they're trying to mesh, right? Everyone's trying to find their role, whether it's receivers that are coming in from the last year that didn't necessarily play but took a lot of heat from the criticism of the receivers not producing. So I think everybody's pretty driven to get out there and show that they're not going to have a repeat of last year, getting deep into the playoffs and not having a receiver being able to make a catch. I think that stung the room. Coaches, everybody. And so I would assume the receivers to come out with a bit of a chip on their shoulder, and some of the young guys looking to prove themselves.
One of the biggest questions that was going around this past weekend from the media was the expectations for this upcoming season. And it's been a huge conversation nationally. I believe the coaches poll has come out and has Penn State at number 3. So I think there's a lot of people who put more stock in that, because it's the coaches and it's the people dealing with the nitty gritty of the sport and who understand the sport and the teams that are out there. So there's the expectation of Penn State being able to contend for the Big Ten championship. And I believe, according to FanDuel, Penn State is second only to Ohio State, Oregon at third in terms of the odds to win the Big Ten championship game itself. And then Penn State, the odds to win the national championship have improved incrementally. One is Texas plus 600, Georgia plus 650, Ohio State also plus 650, and then Penn State plus 700. After that, it's a steep drop off to Alabama and Clemson, who are both at plus 1,100. There was that consistent questioning, Justin, of is the goal to win the national championship? And just about every guy was able to duck that. And I say that in a good way, in that you heard Nick Dawkins say, is like, yeah, the expectations haven't changed. It's go 1-0.
Right.
And Drew Aller, talking about the quarterback before, said, I think to win our ultimate goal, it's all about the team. No one person or group loses a game. Different team, new year. Kind of referring to the wide receiver issues of the Notre Dame game last year. How infuriating is that as a player to hear the comparisons between last year's team to this year's team? You haven't even played a game yet. Nevada is on August 30th. And then also trying to deflect that question about the national championship when it's like, yeah, of course, everybody in that building is thinking about it, but we're not going to put that messaging out there.
I mean, it's like the elephant in the room. I mean, as a competitor, you almost want everybody to see the elephant. So we're extremely clear on what we're aiming for. So I think it's a delicate balance, because you do have to be singly focused on that want to know, but you also have to have perspective on what you're trying to accomplish with each want to know victory. And I think if you do that the right way, you should be able to have some residual impact from viewing it that way and be able to last the whole season, because you have to, it's an emotional ride and you do have to keep yourself centered, but understand what the ultimate goal is.
And Penn State, to your point about the long season ahead, playing a long season last year, there are still players recovering from last year, are just getting involved in training camp. And James Franklin said it, the injury list is a little longer than he'd like it to be, but the benefit of the schedule in the early going is no disrespect to Nevada, FIU and Villanova. Those are essentially preseason games, 3 non-conference games. Then you get a bye, and then you have Oregon September 27th at home, night game, whiteout, all that sort of stuff. So you have that time to continue some of these position battles, which I'll get into more of those tomorrow here on State of State when we talk about the coaches' comments. But it just gives you a nice runway in the grand scheme of things, because this is a season that theoretically should run into December and into January. So hop in the comments section. Let us know how you guys are feeling about the roster at this point in time, what you've heard out of camp. Tomorrow, we're going to dive into recent comments from the coaching staff, the likes of James Franklin, Andy Kotelnicki, Jim Knowles, Justin Lustig at special teams. We've seen questions about what's going on with special teams. So thank you to those of you that have gotten in our comments section. And also Phil Troutline, offensive line coach, with some very interesting comments this past weekend. So that will be tomorrow right here on State of State, presented by FanDuel. Thank you all so much for joining us. This episode and our entire library of shows is available now on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. Please like, comment, subscribe, rate us, and turn on notifications. Follow us on social media at State of State Pod. Comment on our YouTube channel. And if you haven't done so already, you can become a member of our YouTube channel. For just 99 cents a month, you can get all upcoming episodes of State of State, plus our entire members-only playlist, ad-free, commercial-free. Hit the join button on our homepage or follow the link in the description of this podcast. State of State is presented by FanDuel.